Okay, thank you everyone for joining us for the 15th Annual Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo. Since 2010, MICE has grown into the largest independent comic show in New England, so thank you all for making that happen. Today's moderator, Kurt Ankeny, is an accomplished cartoonist and painter and longtime supporter of MICE. And without further ado, Kurt Ankeny.
Hey.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming out today. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
So I would like to introduce my panelists today. We're going to be talking about, we're going to be discussing the work of this group of creators who all have comics that really deal with sort of urban living, but in very different ways, from different angles, from different viewpoints. And so I'm going to try and knit these all together into a sort of cohesive discussion. But our first guests are Bob Bergeron and Katy Finch. Bob plays bass and makes comics. He lives in Portland, Maine, with a cat named Fred. Katy is a lifelong fan of underdogs, a zine maker since the 90s, a reluctant social worker, and a mom of a 15-year-old dynamo. She lives in Portland, Maine as well, and sometimes thinks about moving back to New York City. Bob and Katy collaborate to make the comic zine The Pirate Ship, which you can see here. Next we have Deena Mohammed. Deena is an Egyptian designer, illustrator, and writer. She first began making comics at age 18 when she created the viral webcomic. Forgive me, I do not know how to pronounce that. Kahera.
Yes, very good.
Originally published in Arabic in Egypt, Shubek Lubek was awarded the Best Graphic Novel Prize and the Grand Prize at the 2017 Cairo Comics Festival. She lives and works in Cairo, Egypt, and we thank her for making the trip. Next we have Karl Krumpholz, or he goes by Karl Christian Krumpholz as an author. You're originally from Philadelphia, but you've lived up in this area.
Yeah, I lived in Boston for 10 years.
Okay. So originally from a city on the American East Coast, his work has appeared in many different published formats and even animated in a documentary. He's the author of several comic series set in the city, including It's Ula, In the City, as you can see here, and The Lighthouse in the City. And also his book, Queen City, A Brief History in Illustrated Architecture, New and Old of Denver, Colorado, was a history finalist in the Colorado Book Awards in 2022. And finally, we have Rocky Cotard. Rocky was born in Haiti and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. And he places himself between the two cultures as a bridge for artistic international connections. He draws inspiration from artists like Gontran Durocher, Philippe Dodard, and Ronald Meves. He returns to Haiti on a yearly basis, informing his work on experiential research. His body of illustrations depicts the perspective of the Haitian diaspora in defiance to the narrow representation of it through media. So welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for being here. Oh, I'm sorry. This is Rocky's work here. I forgot to change the slide. I was sort of fishing around for a framework to sort of work this discussion. And because your comics all deal with the city, but all deal with it in such different ways, I thought we could use this quote from Seth Lowe as a scaffolding to build our conversation on. So Seth Lowe is a mayor of both Brooklyn and New York City around the turn of the century. And this quote is, "The great city can teach something that no university by itself can altogether impart. A vivid sense of the largeness of human brotherhood, a vivid sense of man's increasing obligation to man, a vivid sense of our absolute dependence on one another." So I want to take each of those bits in turn. And I first wanted to talk about this vivid sense of the largeness of human brotherhood. And Karl, I wanted to start with your comics because your comics, they seem to touch on this frequently. And in reading 2 issues of like In the City, it feels to me like you think about this aspect of city living a lot. and it provides like an engine to your stories most frequently.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how your comics, which are really kind of a love letter to city living, illustrate this idea of like the largeness of human brotherhood?
Well, again, write what you know, and I've always lived in a city, and I've always been, I think the one thing that influences all my work is the fact that people live in a city, and at least in my belief, it gives you a kind of empathy for one another because you're living atop one another. You see what everyone is going through. Sure, there can be bad times for this, but I like the optimistic view of you kind of learn and look out for one another. If that's I think that's the largeness.
Well, I feel like in your comics frequently, like your sort of avatar, I will say, is like a main character, I think.
Yeah, my character in, especially in the city, my character's just the witness.
Yeah.
My character says nothing. He's just recording and watching everything that goes around. And my wife, Kelly, who's also in the comic, she's the one who deals and talks and has conversations with people. Right.
And the other thing that struck me as I was reading your comics is that there's, it's frequently like little vignettes of you meeting characters that you wouldn't meet in any other milieu, right? You wouldn't meet.
And all this, I'm writing what I know. The vast majority of everything that happens in my comic actually happened.
Sure. And
I'm just putting it into a narrative. But yeah, trying to record. Like, I've got a character in my comic that's always doing the optimistic views of the city, saying this is great, this is great, this is great. And then I've got another character who's almost like the chorus that pops up every issue going, this sucks. Why am I living in this dirty hellhole?
Right.
So I'm trying to bring both the good and the bad. Because I always felt city life, it's utopia and dystopia at the same time.
Right.
You've got the beautiful art and restaurants and nightlife and music and fantastic things around every corner. But then you also got the crime, the poverty, the prostitution, all that. It's both merged together. That's kind of why I love it.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Katy and Bob, I wanted to talk about your comics for a little bit. Because your comics also, I feel like your comics also have this deep understanding of the breadth of human brotherhood, because you often deal with these relationships that happen when people are unhoused or when people are in like sort of very severe living situations, and yet these people like form friendships, they form alliances, they look out for one another. Tell us a little bit about your comics and how you talk about these friendships that form in such harsh environment.
Sure. I was homeless for 10 years out on the streets of Portland, Maine, and drunk for the majority of that time. And I hung out. Portland, if anybody's ever visited, is a seafaring town. And even though that work doesn't exist so much as it used to, that culture still remains, hence the pirate ship and the idea that that the peninsula that makes up Greater Portland, or rather the city of Portland, was our ship. It was our pirate ship. We felt like we looked and acted in that manner. But it was flat out survival in terms of the human brotherhood, the sense of connection, because it was sisterhood also. It was okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to add something.
Yes, please do.
When Bob and I first met, he talked a lot about how he really hated the way that people who are unhoused are portrayed. The black and white, slow sort of fade into the Sarah McLachlan.
Oh yeah, the
music,
sad story,
right?
and we're
just
gonna
like the tear going down. So he really talked about how we actually have fun out here, despite how hard it is. And I think that that's part of the brotherhood.
Yeah, there was a camaraderie that was based on survival, but then it extended to all the same experiences that anybody in any setting would have. And that's that you're going to have joy and defeat and fortune and misfortune and etc. So it was actually an insight into a human microcosm just set against a paradigm that most people are never allowed an insight into. And that sounds very like we struck on something quite significant with that. But ultimately, I mean, we're still, we just like making comics, and that's a connection with folks, with the audience. And, but yeah, the brotherhood was key to our survival.
Yeah, I chose this this page in particular because it's sort of the last page of a little sequence where these two characters are looking for. They're sort of looking for. They had figured out how to like. They were collecting bottles and cans, I think.
That's it. They were canning.
They had like collected like a whole bunch. They were like looking for a payday.
Yeah.
Out of this, and then it's raining, and like the streets start flooding, and this last page, like the shopping cart that they've got all their goods in, is starting to like wash away down the alleyway, right? And so it's this whole little like comical sequence that even though they're in such sort of dire straits, like at the end you don't really feel like they're that much worse off than when they started. It's like one of those situations where you've got like this fortune fell in their lap and then it was sort of whisked away, right? That sort of turn of fate, right?
Indeed. And for all we know, at the very end, they get the $2. They may have, for all the bottles and cans in that cart, it may have only been a little more than $2. So there's the universe in a nutshell, right?
Right, exactly. Deena, let me turn to your work a little bit.
Sure.
Your book, Schubeck Liebig, it has a strong theme of brotherhood in this city, and even among people who are sort of like only incidentally linked, I think. And I think especially about the two main characters of Shokri and Shaukia, who really are only connected in any way because Shaukia comes to buy cigarettes from Shokri's stand every day, right? And has been doing so for 10 years. Hold on a second here. So I'm curious why you chose this particular, like, very casual sort of incidental relationship to be sort of the seed of the book, and how you feel like that relates to that city living and your experiences in living in the city.
Yeah. So for me, the kiosk, which was kind of like the central key when I was thinking about this book. So kiosks are sort of like small stalls in Cairo that you can like buy all these different like drinks, and usually like people usually go for cigarettes or drinks. Like those are the main things that people will buy from a kiosk. In New York, they have bodegas. Yep. I've been asking. In Boston, there's no equivalent so far. Gas station, maybe?
Yeah, it's like we are Packy and we have the gas station, right? Yeah, so.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, when I started working on this book, I kind of knew I wanted to do something that was set at a kiosk because those kiosks are really interesting to me in that each one is constructed by the person who runs it, because they're kind of like ramshackle construction, so they look different based on just how like you like pile the boxes or where you get your electricity from, like from nearby poles, basically. Yeah. So I wanted to do a story that was set at a kiosk that sold a magical object, and then I was thinking like, what would that be? And then when I decided it would be a wish, that was kind of the beginning of the story for me, because the story is about a world where you can buy and sell wishes, and like the more expensive they are, the more powerful they are. Mm-hmm. And so once I knew the story would be set in a kiosk, I think part of the reason, so once you create a world where wishes have a price tag, obviously, so one of also the fascination of kiosks for me is that they're very, very colorful, and like they often stand out in Cairo, which like the buildings are like mostly brown or beige. And one of the reasons they're so colorful is because they're covered in brands, right? So it's like a little, like a capitalist oasis in some ways. It's covered in advertisements. It's always like so much thought goes into every design that just ends up in a kiosk. And so I was thinking of wishes in that sense, right? Like the sense of like sort of classification of a wish. And so the conceit of the story is I was basically, once I realized that this is a world where you can buy and sell wishes, suddenly it kind of contradicted my original goal because I wanted people to buy a wish from that kiosk, but then you would only be able to buy cheap wishes from a kiosk like that, right? And I wanted the story to revolve around expensive wishes. And so the main character of the story, Shukri, who runs the kiosk, he doesn't sell his first class wishes because he believes wishes are religiously impermissible or like haram. But he just has them. It's almost like, like buying a Cadillac from like a deli. Like that would be the like equivalent of it. And so I feel like it was because I think a lot of Egypt is a really classist society, but kiosks are like one of the places where you can come across all these different types of people, And so I think that's also part of what fascinates me about it. Like whenever I'm at a kiosk, I love seeing like all these different people who come by.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the choice of having it set there. And it was also part of the choice of like because just the structure in and of itself made me think about like, commodities and wishes as commodities. And so like he has this old woman who stops by his kiosk every day to buy cigarettes, which is also like part of the story I will not spoil. But because I knew that like there would sort of be a wish concerning health at some point. So I did have this like set up from the beginning. And so he's had the sign up for like first class wishes. Like he's had it up for like 10 years and obviously no one has bit because who again would buy like a first class wish from a kiosk. And so this woman says, my nephew's a graphic designer, my grandnephew's a graphic designer, he can make you a fancy sign.
Right. And does what every like beginner graphic designer
exactly.
does.
And I was studying graphic design, so this is just me taking it out on that. Yes.
Maybe I think I'm reading this right, but the two main characters are basically from the same class, right?
To some extent, yes.
To some extent,
yes.
Okay.
In some ways.
Because they're both sort of successful business owners. It's sort of revealed at the end, right?
Yes. In some ways, they're very similar. They're also from the same parts of Upper Egypt. So neither of them are from Cairo. They're people who came to Cairo for work and other reasons. And so my story is set in Cairo, but it's largely about Egypt. So I did start it through the lens of this kiosk, and then you sort of find out how far back like everything goes, which I think that's how Cairo feels. It's just kind of like all roads lead there in some way, not to steal Rome's thunder.
I want to say that like, I was looking up some statistics about the population of Egypt, and the country, like the U.S. is still like, is already like 80% urban, like 80% of the population lives in a city or in an urban area.
Yeah.
But Egypt is still like less than half of people live in an urban area. So is there still that sort of, I feel like in the United States we have this it's become sort of mythology because most of us didn't live through it, but this mythology of people coming to the city and like changing their lives dramatically through the city. Is that part of the story that you're telling?
Yes, in some ways, because I think there was a period where a lot of people moved to Cairo because of like, for, financial opportunity that wasn't available in the countryside. And like Cairo is huge. Like the population of Cairo is around like
25 million.
Yeah, it's like 25 million people. It's a really, really big city. And so I think, but the funny thing is that no one actually likes living there. I think so many people who come to Cairo for work, they appreciate the connections, the opportunities, whatever. But I think the amount of, it's really the worst place in Egypt. Like I didn't realize this because I was born there and raised there. But when I go to like other places in Egypt, I'm kind of like, wait, is this country nice? Like that's how it feels. Like sometimes, like, other parts of Egypt, like they have a sea. Like whenever Alexandria is the second biggest city in Egypt. Whenever they come to Cairo, they actually like they get some kind of syndrome of like lack of seeing the sea. They're just like, there's no air in this place, and it's very
like
real.
Boston natives also have that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. So, Rocky, I want to get to you next, but I want to switch our framework here to the second part of Lowe's quote, which is a vivid sense of man's increasing obligation to man. And I feel like your comic is especially like important here because your work really is this comic in particular is really confronting a situation where that obligation among the citizens of a city is sort of being it's being distorted or altogether denied, because your comic. Tell us about your comic and about this relationship of sort of the wealthier citizens of a city and the sort of collective action of city residents. Like, tell us about your comics and what it talks about.
Yeah, so in short, I feel like it's the way I've been introducing it is the origin story of a city. That's really one of the key pieces that I feel like was a significant part of this story. And I think in many ways it feels like many cities start out with the common people engaging and really finding the convenience of it for work purposes or whatever it may be. And then how it transforms once more people start to move in and start to acknowledge the convenience of it and start to build that definition. And I think in so many different ways, like I respond to the many things that were said here too, and in that this really feels like a book that's meant to have us look at our environment and question it and say, hey, I actually had a part in making this really expensive part of town. Or someone that I know has had a part, but nonetheless access is limited. And
so describe the premise of your short comic real quickly for everybody.
Yes.
That might have not read it.
So the book follows the efforts of an organization, conservation law firm, which is native to Boston and works towards environmentalist goals to support towns, and specifically the Boston Harbor. As I sort of learned, I feel like as I made it, I was learning and taking in a lot of information. Historically, was not as beautiful as it is now. I feel like a lot of folks, and I also think that for my generation, that's not something we experienced or saw. But of course,
for those of us that have, not that I've lived around
right.
here for a long time, but for those people that have been here for several generations, like Boston was, the victim of the sort of like 1960s and 70s freeways everywhere along the broad front, and before the Big Dig and before the Greenway initiatives. Like the whole thing was very industrial and very clogged, and you couldn't even get to the sea most of the time. So, okay, you can go ahead.
Yeah, and I also, I think I love the fact that you mentioned the sea too, because of the fact that it's just super inaccessible. And but the premise is really that following the organization's efforts and bringing in local volunteers to really make a space as gorgeous as it possibly can. And then once that process has taken shape and it is as beautiful as it can, what happens then? Who owns it? Like when a work is done by volunteers and someone actually does all this work to make it what it is, who then gets the rights to be in that space? How do we maintain the rights of the everyday individual to be in that space? And so I think that's really the question that I feel like in some ways the book goes into, but also allows for an audience experience beyond it to really think about that answer as well.
Right, and you're specifically pointing out the fact that even though this cleanup and beautification of the Boston Harbor was this collective effort by taxpayers and volunteers and whatnot, that now we have, anybody that's been here for even 10 years has seen the explosion of development in the Seaport District, some of whom are trying to actually privatize their section of the harbor front. And that's specifically the issue that your comic is being sort of activist for, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll honestly own the fact that the parking is just aggressive. I think there was a point where I was like, it's $20 to park here.
Oh, yeah, where it used to be like a giant empty lot that you park for $20.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Katy and Bob, the pirate ship also deals with this sense of the increasing obligation of to man, and also the distortion of this obligation amongst city residents. And this page in particular was a very poignant thing where you've got these people who are unhoused hanging out or camping out in front of this building that is largely empty as far as it looks, and it's for rent, of course, but there's all this capacity for housing that's being unused because nobody's profiting off of it. And can you guys talk about that sense of the city's sort of like surplus of riches that are sort of stingily shared?
You want to start
Where do we begin?
Do we have the whole weekend?
I know.
Yeah. This is where we discovered, or where we were able to tap into some social issues that, they certainly got us a bit of a readership in Portland, Maine, because there hadn't been any insight into a person like myself and what our point of view was on, in many ways, the access that Rocky was talking about, and that now you have a lot of folks that visit Portland that have more dough than you could imagine. They have boats that are bigger than houses and such. And,
the cruise ships, when they come in, they dwarf the city.
Yeah,
It's nuts.
The line from the Sex Pistols, "Holiday in the Sun," springs to mind. You shouldn't holiday in other people's misery. Three blocks down the road, me and my friends were picking in the trash can and being, looked down upon, but we needed to eat. And that sounds a little harsh, but it goes back to the first part of the question, where we only had each other, and there was a lack of judgment between each other about that, at least in terms of classism. But then we were on the regular assaulted with all of our senses by the lack of access, the constant reminder of the lack of access we had to the resources around us.
And we created this comic when I was still working as a caseworker. And I was working primarily with people who were unhoused or who had history of being unhoused.
Yeah.
And then also had been making the comic with Bob for years at that point, and was just acutely aware of all these people that I was being tasked with finding housing in the midst of COVID still. And there were, my office was surrounded by buildings that were empty. But our hallways were full of people who were looking for food, and were looking for sleeping bags, and were looking for socks.
Yeah.
And the only place they could stay was the shelter, which was miles outside of town, and it is sited at the dump. So, and then I live in this very different world than Bob did at the time, and I had friends who were moving up to Maine because, they
That's
had
how life
remote
should be, right?
jobs, and
Quality
they
of life.
could buy these wonderful places, and it was a strange thing to be sort of straddling both worlds. When I would go to work, and then my social life was having a very different conversation. And we had this opportunity when we started the comic to, like, this guy who has a free newspaper in Portland gave us a page that he basically said, like, if you have a comic, I'll print it. And we started that 2018. So
yeah.
by this time, it was sort of, we've been producing a comic every month, and we realized, we have a platform.
Yeah.
And we never wanted to make political comics,
Sure.
but by the nature of the subject matter, it's political.
Yeah.
And so there were certain times when we really just leaned into, like, didn't need to say much.
Yeah, every once in a
Just
while,
sort of
it was
say
a
what
bit
everyone's
of,
thinking.
there was a little comeuppance maybe, or it was great to have that platform and just, yeah.
And have you guys seen that platform, that voice? Have you seen that voice amplified in a way that's beneficial?
It's interesting. I think so. There's the community who are, people who are unhoused or who have been unhoused, who we feel it's really important that there's like the physical copy, right?
Yes,
Because
right.
they don't necessarily have access to the Substack, posting of it.
Right, yeah.
And so there's the impact of that, of like just being seen and witnessed and represented in a way, from someone who has lived that life,
Yeah, some of my
which is a
people
very
had the-
different thing than
Yeah, they
someone.
had the chance to dream and hope again.
Right.
Like somebody they knew was doing a big thing. in this newspaper, and that gave a lot of people a sense of hope, and that maybe you could make it out. And subsequently, I did end up becoming housed. That's been going on for a number of years. It's caused us to transition to, well, what happens next? You know, how do you relearn how to live in the real world in the face of all this trauma that you've accumulated? So a whole other thing, you know, area to explore. But just being able to give that sense of succor would be the word I would choose to my fellows who had struggled in the same way, to know that they had a voice and that it was represented and in the fullness of their lives, rather than what Katy was talking about earlier, where you know, the black and white thing where you're trying to pull at the heartstrings for a donation. It wasn't just all that, you know.
Right,
there
right.
was a richness to it.
It was a way of being deeply seen, deeply understood, and deeply
Yeah.
broadcast to the broader population, right?
Right.
It was very
And
humbling and an honor.
I think the people, though, who have power
Yes,
in the city,
yes.
I hear a lot of how much they love the comic and how it's so wonderful that you do it. And I don't see any change in actual
Right.
policy
You get lip service but no
around
action.
housing.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So,
And
but-
I assume that Portland, like most cities in the U.S. right now, are experiencing like an exacerbation of this situation where you've got, you know, like we have at the Seaport District in Boston, these luxury buildings going up all over the place for millions of dollars, and yet, you know,
They're
we're
sweeping
still unable
campsites.
to. Yeah, we're still unable to house, you know, in basic accommodations, you know,
right.
our
And
citizens.
arresting people for living in a tent.
Right, for just being out there. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Have we sufficiently brought the room down?
We try never to forget the word comic in comic books. So it's
But I
not
think
all.
it is an important, when we're, I don't know what microphone is making that noise, but I think it is important when we're talking about cities, when we're talking about city living, and we're talking about all these different aspects of living in a city, is that you get, you know, the full spectrum of, you know, the highest highs and the lowest lows in a city. Like everybody's on top of each other. All of us are, confronted with everybody else's lives on a regular basis. And you know, Karl, I want to transition to you in that the one thing that I noticed in your In the City comic is that you have this recurring character, Den, who your character and your wife's avatar character, they have this sort of like obligation to
look
as well, right?
Yeah, because he's a friend, and he's based on not one person, but several people we know
Yeah.
that have had issues with alcohol. So he seems to be perpetually drunk, and that's that idea of that I mentioned earlier of empathy and looking out for one another.
Yeah.
You know, when someone falls down, you try to pick them back up, try to put them on the right path, but you kind of know, yeah, he's going to fall down again the
Right.
next day.
But at the same time, like this character, Den,
And he's
you know,
named
did
Den
you-
because of Denver.
I kind of figured that.
Yeah.
You guys have this sort of obligation to him, but at the same time, he's sort of this. He's one of the hearts of your comic, right?
Yeah,
he's got
he's-
this amazing like scene just before this scene. Go ahead.
This sounds arrogant for me to say, but I wanted, like, you know, Shaggy, Scooby, Falstaff, that sort of comical character.
Yes, right, exactly. Right.
Yeah, that's someone that you know is going to end up badly, but you're kind of rooting for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have these sort of like, you have the repeated incidents in your comics as well, where you have like just sort of these, this sense of the city where I think it's like people at their best in a city where you just sort of pick each other up because it's easy to do so, and
It's the kind thing to do.
It's kind to do, and,
Yeah.
and you know, you get it a lot in Boston. You
I
get
mean,
that sort of sense.
I think I
of-
did a comic a long time ago. It's like, you know, would you rather be nice or be kind?
Yes, and that's often something that's like,
Yeah.
I'm from the Midwest, and that's often like something that the East Coasters like to hit us with, is that, you know, well, the people from the Midwest are
Yeah.
nice, but they're not kind.
And the people on
Whereas
the East Coast are not nice, but they are
They'll make
kind.
fun of you, but they'll help you with
Yeah.
whatever. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I did a comic a while ago in my Lighthouse in the City comics, basically, where we talk about that idea where someone who wants to be nice, you know, would see someone without in a snowstorm, you don't have a coat on. And
Yes.
someone who's nice has said, oh, you should really get a coat. But someone who's kind might be like, what the fuck's wrong with you, you idiot? Here, take my coat, go home, call your mom,
Right,
idiot. But you're being kind.
Right. Don't know what
And I
that's.
kind of much rather be kind than nice.
Kind of nice. Yeah, of course. Deena, in your comic, you go into this. I know I'm sort of.
You've
I'm
chosen
sort of
such
getting to the
random
end, right?
pages. Yeah, I'm very fascinated by
But
this.
they're
Yeah.
thematic pages, right? So I'm
Yeah.
choosing this page because the one thing I want to talk about your comic is that your main character Shokri, he feels such a sense of obligation to another character that he really tortures himself and really he really
Wow.
struggles with his own sense of right and wrong towards the end of the book. So you can talk about that sort of like that relationship that you found in this story where, you know, you have these two people that are just sort of incidentally related and yet he feels a deep obligation to her.
Yeah, I mean, Shukri to me is someone, first of all, is very different than myself. So obviously, I think most people who read the book, when they like come to, for example, Cairo Comics and see me, they're just sort of like, wait, you wrote this? Like in a very, like almost a derogatory way. They're like, you wrote this? But I will say like Shukri is someone I feel like I completely understand because he's very similar to a lot of people I've met in Egypt. Like this sort of sense of extremely natural kindness. And I do think part of it comes from like a religious sense of obligation, and it's deeper than that because there are religious people who are kind and then there are religious people who are not kind.
Yes.
So I think he's religious and kind. So I feel like these are two aspects of the personality. I feel like
I would almost say he's deeply kind and he happens to be religious.
I would actually disagree.
You think
I think in some ways it can be really tempting to sort of separate those things, but I feel like for certain people and certain cultures, they're really inseparable. Like to him, his kindness comes from his religion, but it's totally possible for someone else to just have the religion part without having the kindness.
Yes.
But I think with Shukri, that was important. That's the key to the character, really, to figure it out. Like you almost like in some ways you would wish that he wasn't religious because he's also that's what made him like in some ways, you know, a little bit bigoted, a little bit presumptuous because it comes from that side of him, right? But at the end of the day, at the core of him, he's a character who's both religious and kind. And I think, I don't know if this is a character that you encounter a lot here. I feel like probably some people are more familiar with this than others. Maybe people who live outside the city, perhaps. I don't know. I don't know enough about American ecosystems to make this assertion. But in Egypt, this is a type of person I know very, very well. And so like with Shukri, it comes very naturally. Like he's the kind of person who's just always doing good things, just constantly. Like he's, you know, the kind of person who's just always giving money to someone on the street. And the kind of person, and you do meet these kind of people, I think, across your life. I feel like you will always meet the people who will like fish for change, you know, like, and then the people who don't. I feel like this is something you can almost like categorize people in this way.
I would posit that in America, these people still exist. Of course they do. But we have gotten out of the habit over the last several decades of celebrating them in our media and in our stories often. But yeah.
Yeah, I did want to, I guess, yeah, I feel like, you know, in Egypt, it's a much more simple binary of like kindness is good because there is still that sense of like religious obligation where, you know, even if you have all of these arguments for why it's not practical, why it's like silly, why you have all these different things to do, at the end of the day, there is a higher sense of like purpose for some people where it's just like that's almost a defense that they can use. Like the defense of like, why wouldn't I help these people comes from like a higher order almost, and that's like a shield that someone like Shukri can use. Like, of course I should do this. But that's not to say like this is the tension of his character. Like I'm not trying to say like he's a good character in some ways because he is, but that's also part of what makes him so annoying in this particular book.
Right,
I'm trying not to spoil.
We're trying not to spoil it, but he is willing to go to significant lengths.
He's going to significant lengths, and also a large part of it is that he's also secretly trying to get rid of something that's a burden to him. So it's almost like he's found a solution for something, and he's just trying to force his perspective onto other people to sort of make it work. Again, I'm so curious, like the pages you've chose, because like I have so many buildings. I had to draw so many buildings for this book.
I'm sorry that it wasn't just building after building.
No, I'm
hard labor of everybody on this.
I know. I'm very delighted that you've chosen this page, because I think this is the point where a lot of people, actually in the third part, do get kind of like sick of Shokri, because he spends a lot of time deliberating. Like his wife is also annoyed in this particular scene.
Right. Yeah, she tells him to go to. That's his wife.
He's just like a lot of back and forth of him just making these sort of arguments to himself.
I think one of the reasons that Shokri spoke to me and felt interesting was that like my father-in-law is very much like Shokri, and served in the church and was from Puerto Rico, and so he has that sort of background, but also like deeply kind person willing to make deep sacrifices for others, and so that sort of deep sense of obligation to other people that you barely know is something that I feel like was well illustrated by your story.
Yeah, I think there's always contradictions within people. Like Shokri is someone who's very kind. He's also very judgmental. It happens.
Yes.
And there are some people who are judgmental without being kind. It's like you get all sorts. So I do feel like it's the type of person that's so common. Like you said, we meet them every day, but people have almost stopped depicting them in some sense.
Yeah,
it just felt strange to me to have a story about Egypt that doesn't have like this pillar of our society.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so we're starting to run out of time here a little bit, but I did want to talk about the last sort of section of this quote is that he points out that a city will illustrate a vivid sense of our absolute dependence on one another, and I feel like all of you have that theme running through your comics. Of what I'm curious about, and I want each of you to sort of answer this if you could in turn, is why do you think comics help you tell these stories? What is it about the comics form in particular that you think help you tell these stories about how we interact with each other in this really like entangled way in cities? I'll let whoever wants to start. Rocky, do you want to give it a go?
I think my initial thought is something that comes across, especially working on some of the comics that I've worked on. Maybe it's my attention span. Maybe it's like I need colors. Maybe it's that I need things to be a little more like vivid, as the quote says. But I think comics does this really great job of like freshening up stories that at times may be really difficult to be attentive to if they are shared in a full-length document.
So that the breakup of the text versus
yes, the breakup of the text, the acknowledgement of the audience, and the access of the story, I think just overall feels very clear to someone who is young, but also someone who's older. And I think that's really the beauty of working in comics, using whether it is humor, whether it is metaphors, you leave with it, whether young or old, with something that feels specific to you. And so I think in so many different ways, the way that I would say that in my personal work, I feel like it's creating that dependence is that there is understanding.
Yeah, and it sort of hits people, and like I've heard speakers and whatnot talk about how there's like there's audio channels to the brain, there's visual channels to the brain, there's like textual language channels to the brain, and almost like it's like the comics can drive your point home through multiple channels instead of just one, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I was going to say, I also think it also can it's approachable for anyone.
Yeah.
But that also means it's approachable. You don't have to speak English. Like a lot of my comics, I
they're
do
nearly silent, right?
Show, don't tell, so anyone can get that idea across. Hopefully, in reading comics.
Yeah. Katy and Bob, I'm curious how you guys came to comics and how you how you felt that comics helped you get your message out.
It's the cheapest way to make a movie.
It is. There are a lot of like frustrated movie directors in comics, aren't there?
I'm sure Bob has some brilliant things to say. That I just want to. My one comment is that I always love the idea of the gutter.
Yes.
The space in between the panels, because I feel like comics ask us to bring ourselves to the story every time, because there's so much that's in the gutter, and we decide what's in the gutter.
Yes.
And so we have to make connections from the panel to the panel to the panel. Whereas I feel like with a book, the words are connecting the thoughts, right? The edit is connecting the pieces of film in a movie, right? But that it's such an interesting art form to me that there is space that the person engaging with it has to create that connection. So that's my little anecdote. But
Yeah, Bob, what are your feelings?
And an important one, nonetheless. I couldn't have said it any better. The other thing that I would add when we talk about the particular environment, as would be the case with any city, I reckon, if you live in it long enough and have the chance to really soak it in, literally. You know that each city has its own character, and if you're visually inclined, then you just pull that right in. And I know for me, I wanted to express, we're right on the ocean, so everything's crooked, everything's, all the cobblestones are all out of alignment and bumpy.
Yeah, Portland is totally like that.
Yeah, and everything's like gray and wind washed in a sense. You get this wonderful Gothic feel, and so it's just it's really advantageous to exploit the hell out of that visually. It's a lot of fun. It makes for good storytelling.
Yeah. And I also want to preface your thoughts with, I feel like your book almost might have been easier as a novel.
Really?
So why comics?
I mean, to be honest, in Arabic, we write novels in a different dialect than we speak.
Oh, okay.
And I do not think I have the linguistic skill to write this in Arabic. But I also agree with everything everyone has said. There's a point that people might not have read it in the same way if it was just a book. I feel like there's so much power to visuals. But I also think, in adding what Bob was saying about depicting a city, I feel like there's so much novelty, not novelty almost, but there is something very magical about seeing a city through an artist's eyes. And there are some cities that are so almost over depicted because so many artists draw them, like New York, Tokyo, Paris. Like these are cities that you can find thousands and thousands of illustrations set in every corner and alley, and you can see how so many different people have seen that city. Whereas I felt like Cairo is one of those underdrawn cities in some ways,
especially for its size, right?
Yeah, especially for its size, especially for how much it holds, literally, historically and visually and everything. And I think for me, I used to love seeing other artists draw Cairo. Whenever I would find a comic artist that had drawn even something that is as benign as a cup of tea in a coffee shop, I would just be like, that's our coffee, that's our cup of tea. The excitement of that would be so irrational, but it would spark something in my brain, and that's almost why I wanted to do that with Shubik Lubik. And the funny thing to me is that even though it's set in an alternate universe, I did try to keep a realism with the way Cairo is shown here. And I feel like that made such a difference. But it's always funny when other people tell me, I loved how Egyptian this is. And then I'll be like, have you been to Egypt? They'll be like, no. They just they have so much faith that it's a good depiction because they feel like the sense of city is there. So I think that's been something that I feel really strongly, having worked on this book and seeing how people have received it, but also having seen, like Bob said, it's exactly that feeling. You just love seeing the visual, the feeling of a city, distilled into a page. I think is so magical.
Yeah, awesome. So we are almost out of time, but I do want to give an opportunity for the audience to ask any questions you might have. So we have about 5 minutes. Is there anybody that would like to ask any questions? I don't know, do we want to do the handheld for questions, or just speak? Yeah, please, ma'am. So you're asking sort of how do we as creators engage with the publishers of newspapers and magazines that are going to be publishing our work but maybe don't have the same motivation or viewpoint to our work. I guess Bob and Katy, you're probably most.
You have to find a good match. Fortunately for us, the newspaper we work for, they're as left of the dial, radical as you could be in today's day and age, and so they're very happy to have us along if we cause the appropriate amount of trouble. So we lucked into the right spot. These folks are about social progress. And on the other hand, we self-publish because otherwise we probably wouldn't stand a chance. We found a company in is it Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, most of our comics we just publish on our own, and we don't really even break even, but we make it work. We do have a strip monthly in this free newspaper, which is very, very leftist. And we sent them a few pages when we first started, and Bob wrote him a letter, and the guy said, "Sure, we'll publish it." And he doesn't pay us much, but so I would say look for the free newspapers, look for the radical newspapers, send them your stuff, and make a pitch. That's my.
Yeah.
And most of the stuff when I work, most of my stuff is self-published as well. But when I do work with a newspaper in Denver, Colorado, I mostly talk about what they want is I do little features on history of the city. Here's the history of this park. Here's the history of this old building, and I do features about that.
Yeah, sometimes the larger platform can just be an introduction to your work, in which then you can, have your own voice in your more personal work, right? Yeah. Deena, do you have any experience publishing with those types of publications?
No, journalism is dead in Egypt. No, I'm kidding. But no, it functions more or less like more online. Usually, like we that's why I started with webcomics. So we've tended to go into the direction of online comics consistently. Like all the largest newspapers in Egypt, I don't think I'm sorry, this is such a big conversation, but yes, they're not, actually you're right, they're not open to publishing this kind of thing at all. So we've had to find alternative media in any way we can, and in this day and age it usually tends to be the internet. That's the starting for many of us. You have your own website, or you use like bigger platforms, like I started on something called Tumblr that not many people use anymore. There's also like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, like these sort of things where people already are, and you kind of just put your own stuff on there. It's not always, unfortunately, you're at the mercy of these websites in that case. So I think you just kind of have to find any way you can, but also things like this, conventions are great, events are great for getting, you're not getting the circulation of a newspaper, but that's what I've had to do. You've published with?
I think I've worked in some ways like with the Nib, but I don't know if that would be a newspaper per se, being that it is mainly
it's an online publication. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, so.
But yeah, I think go ahead. The Nib.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me, my response to that would be, I found that I guess I haven't had the exact situation that you've outlined, but I think in some ways it is the fact that I've already done that work for my own self personally, and I feel like a lot of the folks that come along to work with me are already aware of my trajectory. Yeah. And so it becomes less of a contention when we are working together and more of a, hey, we know what you do, this is what we're interested in, and where are you at with that?
We're all out of time. I want to thank all of our guests, Katy Finch, Bob Bergeron, Cotard, Deena Mohammed, and Karl Christian Krumpholz. Please visit their tables, buy their books, and enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you all.